This is our sun, and these are smart telescopes. And this is me making a video about how you can photograph one of those things with the other. And my hope is that by the end of this, you'll know which is which. I'll walk you through how to photograph the sun's ever-evolving sunspots. We'll also be going over how to photograph solar transits of aircrafts, satellites, and space stations. But it won't just be me guiding you on this journey. Stick around to the end because we have a very special guest joining us, Nico Carver from Nebula Photos. I'm Sarah Matthews, and as always, grab a snack and let's jump into it. Alrighty, all you sun lovers out there, before we get started, as always, I must stress the importance of solar safety. Please never look up at the sun with the naked eye, please use certified solar glasses, and please never look through a telescope or binoculars or anything like that with your eyes without a solar filter attached or the correct solar equipment. And please never point your telescope with a camera or your camera lens up at the sun without a solar filter attached because you will absolutely obliterate your camera sensor as well. Going blind yourself and blinding your device will also make everyone sad. Now, I'm not sure how many of you know this, but there is another source of light that shines very brightly. And that light is the gratitude that radiates from my heart for all of my amazing subscribers and lovely patrons. Thank you for all of your ongoing support, and if you would like to support this channel, please consider becoming a subscriber and consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon page. I do share image files over there for you to process as well as ad-free content. Again, thank you so much for all of your ongoing support. I couldn't do it without you guys. Our sun is just one of the billions of trillions of stars out there in the universe. And it's also the only star out of all of them that we can actually observe its ever-evolving photosphere or its surface in detail. To observe and image our sun, you don't need a super high-end observatory or expensive telescope setup to do this. The Seestar S50, the DWARF II, and other products from companies such as Vionis are all examples of smart telescopes that, with the addition of their solar filters, you can safely image sunspots, solar transits, and solar eclipses. And you can also use them for nighttime photography to image things like the moon and deep space objects like galaxies and nebulae, as well as do daytime photography of things like birds, which have been really popular with these devices. This can all be done for around $500, or even less with something like the Hestia. So here's the rundown. I'm going to start with the Seestar S50 and go through each different type of solar photography, sunspots, and then solar transits, and then I'll do the same thing for the DWARF II. And then throughout the whole process, I'll be calling out notable differences between the two devices and call out really cool sun facts and anything else that might be of interest to you all. So here we have the Seestar S50 from ZWO. It's an all-in-one software-controlled telescope that includes everything you'd need for solar imaging. Compared to the DWARF II, it does have a longer focal length, which can be a good thing depending on what you're wanting to do with it, but let's dive into the use cases and you can be the judge for yourself. The first subject that we're going to cover are sunspots. But before we do that, let's have a word from our moderate to severe sunspot expert, Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. I'm here to give us a brief overview of sunspots. So the sun isn't solid. It's a giant sphere of extremely hot gas, and it also spins, but not at the same rate everywhere. The rotation period at the equator is faster than near the poles. This differential rotation causes the sun's magnetic field to get wound up and stretched, sometimes intersecting the surface. When that happens, it inhibits convection, or the rising of hotter gases to the surface. And the result is cooler temperatures at the intersection in the form of dark regions or sunspots. Back over to you, Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. So where were we? Ah, yes, imaging sunspots with the Seestar. There's usually a time of day for your specific location where imaging the sun is best, and by best I mean when the images or videos you take will yield the clearest and crispest results. Imaging the sun or any celestial body from down here on Earth means that our telescope must image through air and other particulates in the local sky and the greater atmosphere above, all of which impact the quality of our images. So there are two values that we want to take into consideration to determine the quality of the sky: transparency and seeing. Transparency is the opacity of the atmosphere, or how clear it is, and things like moisture, humidity, all lower the transparency, as does smoke or other kinds of pollution. Now, seeing, on the other hand, basically refers to how stable the atmosphere is, both locally, which means around you, as well as the higher parts of the atmosphere. The more turbulent the atmosphere around us and above us, the worse off our images will be, and the opposite is true, where the steadier the atmosphere, the better and more clear and in focus our images will be. You can use different apps like astrospheric.com if you're in North America to see the seeing conditions and the transparency conditions. As you can see here, it's rated from excellent and poor for transparency, as well as seeing conditions. Seeing is often the real limiting factor in our images. You can only do so much sharpening in post-processing before things really start to look pretty bad. So you really want to make sure that you are imaging with good seeing conditions. Since the sun's activity is always changing, if you want to see what's going on with the sun ahead of time, you can check out spaceweatherlive.com on your desktop or download the app to your mobile device, and it will show you current active regions on the sun and other solar-related activity, which is really fascinating. You can also enable notifications so that if there is a solar flare or a coronal mass ejection, it will notify you, as well as the KP index or solar activity that is related to the aurora. Now let's head out. So we have our Seestar charged up and ready to go. It does come with some nice tripod legs, and it also comes with a solar filter. In terms of a location to set up, make sure the sun will be in view, which I think it goes without saying. Grass is a great option, as is packed down dirt. Next, you want to make sure your Seestar setup is level to ensure accurate and consistent tracking of the sun. So you kind of have two setup options here. Option 1, you could level the tripod legs first before adding the Seestar to the top of them, since there is a physical bubble leveler here on the top of the tripod legs. Or option 2, you could add the tripod legs to the bottom of the Seestar first, and then once in the app, if the Seestar isn't leveled enough, the app will prompt you to level the tripod legs with the aid of its built-in digital leveler. Now, another thing to note, be sure that you orient the lens of the Seestar away from the sun so that when you add the solar filter to it later, you don't damage the Seestar accidentally. Now that we have the Seestar and the tripod ready to go, let's go ahead and turn it on. Next, let's launch the Seestar mobile app on my smartphone so we can start interfacing with it. So let's first connect to the Seestar by pressing the connect button here. You can see the name of my Seestar here as it emits its own Wi-Fi signal. So I'm going to press connect, and it's now connecting. It's going to ask me to join my Seestar's Wi-Fi network, and I'm going to select join. All right, we are connected and in business. So as you can see, we have the power level here. It's at 95%. The Seestar has a 6-hour battery life and uses a USB-C cable to charge. Now, in terms of the actual temperature of the Seestar, be mindful of its operating temperature limit. Now, in terms of storage, we have quite a bit here. The Seestar comes with 64 gigabytes of internal storage, but be sure you have plenty for your specific imaging session. All right, now let's go over here to the focus window. I'm going to enable the manual focus option, even though the Seestar has a nice autofocus feature. Now back to the home screen. We also have a variety of different imaging modes, as I mentioned earlier on in this video, but for this video, we of course want the solar mode. So let's go ahead and select it, and we are greeted with a very lovely message and reminder to install the solar filter. The solar filter isn't built in, so it must be physically mounted to the front of the Seestar. This is a white light solar filter, which is great for imaging sunspots and other phenomena on the photosphere, which again is the visible surface of the sun, or what we see when we think of the sun as this glowing white ball in space. All right, so let's go ahead and use the arrows to move the Seestar lens up. And let's go ahead and add the solar filter to it. And in the app, we can tell it that the filter is on and we are good to go, so it can go to the sun. The ability to locate the sun automatically is a huge win in my opinion for the Seestar. It will automatically move both axes of the Seestar, the altitude and azimuth axes, to do so. Now, let's say that the Seestar has trouble locating and centering up on the sun, so it fails in its go-to function. You may need to recalibrate the compass of the Seestar by going into the settings and following the compass calibration prompt / instructions here. It's very easy to do and just takes a few moments to do. Now, if it still can't find the sun, you can locate it manually. I find that it's most helpful to align the center slit of the Seestar here until the sun is shining straight through, so you at least have a good starting point. But then within the app, just use the touch control buttons to move/slew the alt as mount, right and left and up and down until the sun is in the frame. Then once it is in the frame, you can enable target correction to recenter it and to keep the sun centered. Otherwise, if the Seestar has no issue finding the sun, like in our case in this video, once it has located the sun, it's going to ask you to confirm that the sun is centered in the frame, and then it's going to ask you to enable target correction, which will move the sun back to the center of the field of view if it starts to drift too far from the center. Now, if you want to digitally zoom in within the app, you can also do that either by using the standard 1x, 2x, or 4x zoom views, or by pinching the screen. So in terms of solar imaging modes, we have 3 different ways to capture the sun. We have photo, video, and time-lapse. For imaging sunspots, let's start with photo mode. With photo mode, you can take a single image or a series of images consecutively, but you'd have to do this manually. Now, you might be wondering why you'd want to take a series of images consecutively. The reason you would want to do this is because you would either want to use one of the images that had the best seeing conditions, where everything was the most in focus and everything was the clearest, or you'd want to take all of those individual frames and kind of see which ones had the best seeing conditions and then put those together so that you could see a final stacked image that had more detail on sunspots and other solar features. Something to note though, the image files themselves are taken and saved as JPEGs. Now let's talk about focus. As mentioned, there are 2 ways to focus in the Seestar. You can autofocus and you can also manually focus. It's always best to focus on something with a good deal of contrast. If you don't have any sunspots, you can always use the edge of the sun as well. That shake is due to the fact that it is a little bit windy. So I'm going to tap on this area where I want to focus, and you're going to see this box appear. And then over on the right-hand corner here at the bottom, there is a button with AF. Click that to autofocus, and the box will turn green as it begins to focus. All right, and it's finished. Now, in terms of manual focus, on the left-hand side here, we did enable this feature when we first launched the app, if you remember. But basically what we have here are 4 buttons, which let you move up or down, slower or faster along the focus steps of the Seestar's focuser. The steps refer to the focus placement. Now let's talk about exposure settings. So there are 2 approaches you could take. You could do full auto, in which the Seestar will adjust the brightness according to the field of view. It does a pretty good job with this on its own. Or you could select from the wheel to make it brighter or dimmer. You could also select manual settings. You could select the gain, or basically the ISO equivalent if you're familiar with the DSLR or mirrorless camera, as well as the shutter speed. I generally keep it at the default of exposure settings, where the solar limb or the edge of the sun is slightly darker than the center. If you have something like this, it does mean that the sun is properly exposed, but feel free to experiment if you would like. But once we do have everything in focus, we can go ahead and take an image by pressing the button here. And if you press down here on the bottom left-hand corner, you can access your album. Now going back to why I take multiple photos when imaging the sun surface. Now taking multiple photos is really nice because we can use a third-party stacking software to stack all those images together, or the images with the best seeing conditions. And what it's going to do is it's going to give us more signal to noise, or more SNR, which gives us more opportunity to see what's actually on the sun in more clarity and more detail than you would otherwise see with a single photo. The DWARF II actually has a feature within the mobile app that will stack the photos for you together, but while the Seestar doesn't have this feature for photos, it does have it for time lapses and videos. I mean, after all, a video is just a bunch of images taken very quickly, one after the other. So let's switch over to time-lapse mode. Now the Seestar has quite a few different options for time lapses. You can take a time lapse where it takes a single photo every second for however long you want. Likewise, you could do a time lapse where it takes an image every 2 seconds, 5 seconds, so on and so forth, all the way up to 60 seconds. You'll just need to calculate how long of a video you would want based on those parameters. And you can, of course, change the exposure settings as I showed you before, and you can choose what file format the final video will be taken and stored as. It could either be a compressed .mp4 or an AVI raw video file. AVI is just a type of raw video file, which is nice because you can take an AVI file and use it in popular third-party software to stack later on if you wanted to go that route. Now I'll show you how the stacking feature works for time lapses and videos after I go over the video modes, but just like with time lapses, video files can either be taken and stored as .mp4s or AVI raw files. Personally, for sunspots, I would take raw so that I can stack the individual frames of the video within the app. I've taken a video here, and now we are going to stack the individual frames of the video into a single final stacked image. Next, let's access our album by tapping on the My Album icon here. We want to go into the Seestar album for this, not the downloaded sub-album, and we will need to go under the Solar folder. Next, we will need to select one of our raw time-lapse videos or raw videos. All raw videos of any kind, time-lapse or regular video, will have the word raw overlaid on its thumbnail. And all raw time-lapse videos will have this little clock icon on them, and the raw regular videos won't. So I'm going to select this raw video here. Raw videos from the Seestar will all be 11 frames per second. The frame rate is slower than for non-raw videos or compressed .mp4 files, which are 30 frames per second. But anytime the Seestar takes a raw video, it will simultaneously store a .mp4 version that can be accessed via the My Works folder when the Seestar is connected to your computer. Next, on the top right-hand corner, let's tap on the stack button here, and then the video stacking screen will appear and the app will begin stacking the video's frames. And voila, it's magically done as a result. So let's take a look at the image by tapping the button here, and let's apply some post-processing to it from the Seestar app. So let's tap on Edit on the top right-hand corner. We have the ability to adjust the exposure value. So basically we can brighten or darken the entire image. We can brighten it by using this little slider here and bringing it to the right, and we can darken it by sliding it to the left. We can also reset the exposure value to the default value at any time by pressing Reset. Next, we have the real big powerhouse here, Sharpen. And it looks like the default value is set to 10 already, so a bit of sharpening is applied to the image after it's created. Now let's increase the sharpness to 50. Tons of great detail from this little scope is possible. Now let's talk about solar transits. For this example, we're going to be learning how to capture the ISS transiting the Sun, but the principles will apply to the Chinese space station and the Hubble Space Telescope, and mostly any other low Earth orbiting satellites. So planning is numero uno on our list because imaging these transits is highly dependent on when and where you are on Earth. Yes, the ISS does travel very fast and does transit the Sun often, but due to the fact that the ISS is fairly close to the Earth, it's only visible from narrow paths along the ground. So step one, we need to see when the next ISS solar transit will be for a given location or location range. Let's look at transitfinder.com. This is an excellent website that has proven to be a very reliable resource that can tell us when both solar and lunar transits of the largest artificial satellites will occur. And by that I mean the ISS, the CSS, and the Hubble Space Telescope. But we first need to set up our calculation by inputting some values. Number one, we need to put in our location as the observer/imager. For the geographic coordinates, we will need to add our latitude and longitude coordinates in decimal form, positive for the northern and eastern hemispheres. There are several ways to find out what your latitude and longitude coordinates are for your geographic location. You can use whatismyelevation.com, type in your physical location's address here, and it will convert it for you in decimal form, or you can select your location from the map overlay. Otherwise, you can also follow the same steps using Google Maps or different types of applications. So let's input those values back on transitfinder.com. Next, you'll need to identify your geographic location's elevation in meters. You can find that out at the same website as well, but I know there are others out there. Since transitfinder.com requests that the value be in meters, be sure to toggle this to M for meters and then use that value for your elevation. Oh, and you could also use auto detect or select your location from the map here, but sometimes I feel like these aren't as accurate, at least for me. Next, we need to determine the time space or the range of time we want to see a transit. Transitfinder.com allows us to see dates 10 days into the past and 30 days into the future. My recommendation is to check this site once a week to see what the upcoming transits will be a month into the future. But also, you will need to recheck it a few days before a selected transit to ensure that the trajectory of the ISS hasn't changed, which sometimes it does, in which case transitfinder.com will be updated accordingly. Next, we have the travel distance. There is a maximum distance from the selected coordinates to the center line of the transit's visibility path. So basically, how far are you willing to travel to see the ISS transit across the sun or the moon from your initial location? With the range allowed being from 1 to 240 kilometers, but it's up to you in terms of how far you're willing to travel. I'll talk more about the transit's visibility path and the center line shortly. Next, you can choose to include transit predictions for the Hubble Space Telescope and the Chinese Space Station, but when left unchecked, the calculations are only going to be done for the International Space Station. So once we've entered in our initial values, we can tell the site to calculate, and it will provide a list of transit predictions based on that information we just provided. If no results occur, then that means no transits or close passes are occurring within the specified dates and location, so you will need to expand your selection. But in this case, we have a list. Many of the transits that are listed will be far too small for any details of the ISS to be seen. That's especially true for our smaller telescopes, but that's okay. We can maximize what details we can see by choosing a transit where the angular size of the ISS is well over 50 degrees. By angular size, I mean how large the ISS will appear to the observer from Earth, and it's measured in arc seconds, or 1/3600th of a degree. So if I scroll down, we have several results. The next criteria that I'm going to consider is time of day. This one right here is occurring a little bit later on in the day than I would want, since the sun will have been out for a while and will have warmed things up a little bit more than I want. And it will also be closer to the horizon than this one down here. I really like this one right here, and the angular size is really nice. And it will occur a little after 12 p.m. noon, where the sun will be highest in the sky, which means there will be less atmosphere to image through. However, from this image, as with all of the other images that appeared for our search results, the ISS won't be transiting the sun for any of them, but rather will be doing a quote-unquote close pass from our initial location, which means we will need to find a location where we can actually see the ISS transit the solar disk, and we can do that fairly easily for this selection. So first, take a look at this number here for center line distance. This basically means that from our initial location's coordinates, we would need to travel a minimum distance of 12.61 kilometers to see the ISS transit directly across the center of the solar disk. Since I was like, yeah, I'll travel at least 240 kilometers when I input my range value, that's cool with me. Next, I'm going to click on the Show on Map button for this result. So for context, the green location pin is our starting location, or what we input into Transit Finder initially, and the green dotted circle surrounding everything is our location range that we input, which again was 240 kilometers. So if we zoom in, you'll notice that there is this lighter red path. This red path from one side to the other is quite slim. It's only about 5 kilometers, and so you will need to observe from here to even see it transit the sun's disk at all. Just beyond the red area equals a close pass, not a transit, which we don't want. Now, within the red area right in the middle, we have this dotted center red line. And anywhere on this red dotted line is where you really want to be imaging from, hence the blue location pin, which is the closest point from our initial location, the green pin, to where we would need to travel to see the ISS transit the sun directly across the center of the solar disk. The closer you are on that center dotted line, the closer the ISS will transit across the center of the solar disk. Now, conversely, the further you get away from the center dotted line on this map, the further away the ISS will be from the center of the disk. The reason why you would want to travel to a location where you can see the ISS transit across the center of the solar disk, or even lunar disk, is because the ISS travels very quickly. We're talking 1 or 2 seconds at times, but most likely if it's a good transit, and by that I mean where the transit will appear rather large to us, then the transit length will be milliseconds, which is why we will also be using video to capture it. Which means, for a given transit, if we want to maximize our chances of getting the ISS in at least one frame of our video, we will have the highest chance of doing this if we have a longer transit. So for a given transit, the further from the center of the disk, the shorter the transit will be, and thus the shorter the transit window. Conversely, for that same transit, the closer the ISS transits the center of the disk, the longer the transit, which again would result in a longer transit window for you, which translates to more video frames that you can capture in your video. You'll have more chances of getting a clear shot of the ISS from those frames, since turbulence in the atmosphere is always changing. So the more shots you get, the higher likelihood that you'll at least get one frame where the ISS was fairly clear and in focus. And it also means that for those of you who want to make a composite of those video frames where the ISS transits across the sun like this, that there will be a longer chord of ISS images to composite together into a single image. But basically, as long as you are within this red area, you will at least see it transit the sun. But I highly recommend finding a location like a public park or even a parking lot, if necessary, that is located on the center dotted line to get the longest transit possible. Then, once you've found an exact location on the center dotted line that you can image from and are willing to travel to, go ahead and get the latitude and longitude for it, in decimal form of course, as well as the elevation in meters, and re-enter those values into transitfinder.com to confirm the transit, which it should still appear as one of the results, but will now have maroon text and will have slightly updated values. Cool, so we've identified the best upcoming transit for us. We know the time and date it's going to occur. We've identified where it will be, and we've also found an imaging spot on the center line where we can do our capturing session. Now, step 2 in our preparation is to practice and prepare, which should occur anywhere between 1 to 2 weeks out, or even a month out from the transit. I recommend taking time to practice setting up your Seestar or DWARF II and getting really comfortable with leveling and connecting to the device, and then practice autofocusing and manual focusing as well as capturing videos. And for video, we're gonna wanna take raw videos because single images and even 1 second interval time-lapse videos are way too slow for an ISS transit, so the more frames that we can collect, the better. As mentioned, a regular raw video will be 11 frames per second, but the data won't be compressed, so you can process that data more later on. However, if you want, and even if you don't have plans to process the data afterwards, you can offload the faster .mp4 video that the Seestar also creates during the raw video capture, which will be 30 frames per second, which means you will have more frames with the ISS as a result. For exposure settings, they will be the same for Sunspots, so keep everything at the default in auto. You'll also want to upgrade your firmware and software ahead of time so there are no surprises like bugs in the software the day of. Step 3, check weather a week out for your imaging location. And step 4.1, check to see if the transit path has changed 2 to 3 days out. I mentioned earlier that sometimes the ISS's trajectory will change, and in any case, it's important to check transitfinder.com for any updates to the transit. Also, take a screenshot or photo of the time and date to be accessible on your mobile device for day of to reference. Step 4.2, check weather and cloud coverage again 1 to 3 days out. Check multiple different applications or websites for your weather and cloud coverage, as well as seeing conditions. Step 5, day before transit. Next, you're going to want to prepare and pack your equipment. You'll want to have your Seestar fully charged, so begin charging it. Make sure you have enough storage space on your Seestar for your raw video. Also, be sure that your smart device is fully charged. You're going to want to download another app called Atomic Clock app to your smart device, or some sort of atomic clock app, because in order to capture the ISS exactly at the right time, you're going to need an app that uses the same clock that the ISS uses, which is the atomic clock. And so now that you have the Seestar charged and your mobile device all charged up with enough storage space, go ahead and pack everything up and put everything into your car that you're going to have to travel with. Step number 6, day of transit. Plan to arrive at your imaging location at least 1 hour before transit time. You'll need time to set up your Seestar and have it acclimate to the ambient temperature, which will be especially true if it's going from a very warm location, like it being stored in your house or car beforehand, to going outside if it's colder. You want the Seestar to acclimate so that your images are clear from your local seeing. If the Seestar and the outside ambient temperature are about the same, then it's less of a concern, but it's still something to consider, and I would probably wait to set up the Seestar a little bit so it doesn't warm up too much before the transit window. Next, about 30 minutes before the transit, go ahead and set your Seestar up. Follow all the steps for setting up that we did during the sunspot portion of this video, and once everything is set up, the solar filter is on, you're connected, perform a go-to to the sun. And then once the sun is centered, ensure that it remains centered and enable target correction. You do want to plan for some time in your setup just in case the go-to fails, which would mean you either need to recalibrate your Seestar and or you need to manually locate the sun with the virtual joystick on screen within the app. But once everything is good to go, the sun is centered, target correction is enabled, go ahead and do an autofocus over a sunspot or on the limb of the sun. If autofocus isn't working well, go ahead and use manual focus to dial things in. For exposure settings, keep everything at the auto default settings so as to expose as if we were imaging sunspots as mentioned before. Go ahead and focus again to get things really dialed in. Then go to video and select RAW and capture a test video and just make sure it saves to the Seestar. You can delete that if you want. 5 minutes before, make sure your atomic clock app is open and refocus the Seestar. Be sure to be checking the time as well. 3 minutes before, in the Seestar app, make sure everything is still in focus. Expand the view to full screen. Begin a screen recording on your smart device if you can so that you have a backup view as well. 1 minute before transit. And then within the Seestar app, begin the raw video capture a minute before the transit is actually set to begin. And don't stop the video until at least a minute after the transit is supposed to end. That way you can ensure you got it. Moments before, during, and moments after the transit, be sure to be as still as possible and avoid walking around or bumping the Seestar to avoid vibration in the frames. This also applies to the dwarf. Once a minute or more has passed from checking your atomic clock app, you can go ahead and stop your screen recording if you started one on your mobile device, and then go ahead and stop your video on the Seestar. Next, go to My Album, Seestar, and the raw video should be there. Feel free to watch it back to see if you got it and give yourself a pat on the back. A lot went into capturing this transit. Now, when I tried to capture an ISS solar transit with the Seestar, my first attempt came out subpar, mostly because I selected a transit that was far too small, and the transit also occurred lower on the horizon at about 2 p.m. in the winter, and the Seestar wasn't well in focus. So a very special thank you to Csaba for letting me share and use his video footage of his Seestar capturing the ISS transit the sun. I do apologize if I mispronounced your name, but yeah, thank you so much. You did awesome. So let this just be a reminder that every time you try something new, it's okay if you didn't get the perfect results the first time or the second time. What counts is that you tried and that you learned a lot along the way, which will help you with future pursuits, not only with the next ISS solar transit that you attempt, but also with so many other things. So just don't give up. Now let's move into the DWARF II and capturing sunspots with it and other types of solar transits. So here we are with the DWARF II Smart Telescope. It's a very compact and lightweight device that can be controlled with a smartphone or tablet and can be used to image different celestial objects quite easily. You can also use it for imaging wildlife subjects or sporting events during the day, as it has object detection and tracking that can be enabled. But one of the main differences of the DWARF II compared to the Seestar is that the DWARF II has two lenses. A wide-angle lens for wide-field shots and a telephoto lens for more zoomed-in imaging. Now, let's get the DWARF II set up for imaging sunspots. Again, make sure you pick a day and a time of day where the weather and seeing conditions are favorable to ensure clear and steady images. Also, if you want to check out the sun's activity ahead of time, check spaceweatherlive.com. You can also check out the National Solar Observatory's website as well to view activity on the sun. Now, just like with the Seestar, we want to image at a location that is fairly level to ensure good tracking of the sun. Again, ideal platforms are grass and packed down dirt. Now, before you go outside, you can add the solar filters to the DWARF II ahead of time. The solar filters will allow us to image the sun's visible surface, the photosphere, just like with the Seestar. And then you would want to make sure, of course, that everything is level as possible for accurate tracking. Once the solar filters are on, go ahead and turn it on by pressing the button here. So now let's launch the accompanying app to my smartphone. The app is called DWARF Lab and it can be found in the App Store and the Google Play Store. So here on the home screen, the first thing that we need to do is pair and connect everything up by pressing on the connect button here. So once connected, we are on the expanded home screen view. Now on the home screen, you can see that it has almost a full charge at 92%. It uses rechargeable and swappable batteries, but you can also leave it plugged in and charging with the battery while in use via a USB-C down here on the port here. So within the app, there are several imaging modes we can choose from. The default is going to be set to photo mode, where you just take a single image. Now let's scroll down to the bottom of the list. So we have time-lapse imaging mode, and above that we have a burst mode for taking multiple shots quickly, And then above that, we have a pano mode for panoramic imaging. And then above that, we have an astro mode where we can take raw images and stack them together. This is similar to what we saw and what we did with the Seestar's raw video stacking feature. And then we also have a video mode. So for sunspots, we're going to be trying out all these imaging modes minus pano mode. So first, we need to get the sun centered up in our field of view, and then we need to get the DWARF II tracking it. To locate the sun, we need to do this manually. This, of course, is different than what we did with the Seestar, where the Seestar has built-in go-to for finding the sun automatically. So for the DWARF II, though, we're going to be using the live view of both the wide-angle and telephoto lenses that can be swapped between over here on the left-hand side. We will use the wide-angle view first to get a wider field of view of the sky, since it has a focal length of 48 millimeters compared to the telephoto lens's effective focal length of 675 millimeters or 100 millimeters natively. To control the device, as mentioned before, you can manually move the altitude and azimuth axes with your hands, or you can use the app's built-in virtual joystick controller here. So let's press on the arrows to begin locating the sun. But once in the telephoto view, as indicated by the window at the top left, and also by this smaller box in the center of the wide-angle view here, we can switch to the telephoto view by tapping on the telephoto view at the left. And then we can finish centering the sun. And if we need to adjust the speed of the joystick movements, we can do that here by moving this up to make them faster or moving it down to make it slower. Sweet. So the sun is pretty centered up. Under the function button here, we have feature, and we just need to select the track sun option, and this pop-up window with instructions will appear. This basically tells you step by step how to ensure accurate tracking, how to protect your device by using solar filters, how to find the sun, and also some recommended exposure settings. Now press confirm, and you may see the sun move a little bit. That's the device getting it centered in the frame to track it accurately. On the note about exposure settings, let's dial those in for the telephoto lens. Again, under function, but instead of feature indicated by the box icon, we want to select the one below that with the three little lines and circles. Make sure that tel here is selected, indicated by the line underneath and in white. And over here to the right, make sure in the drop-down we have exposure selected. For shutter or shutter speed then, let's try 1/200th of a second. And then for gain, let's set it to 0. Next, let's go under tone, which is the second word listed here in the drop-down menu. And we have a variety of different tone settings we can enable or adjust. The first is white balance. The default is set to auto, but if we tap on white balance or the WB icon, we have a subset of different white balance options. In addition to your white balance, we can control the brightness, the hue, the saturation, and we can also sharpen the image and adjust the quality of the image. Now let's focus the device, and let's first zoom into the view by pinching the screen and spreading our fingers out. We have a couple of sunspots here, which is perfect for focusing on since they give us a good deal of contrast. Now to focus, let's tap on the focus icon here. The DWARF II has a built-in autofocuser, which works pretty well, but we can also manually focus the device by using the plus and minus buttons here. I'll show you the autofocus feature for this video, but sometimes you may want to use the manual focus buttons to dial things in, just like you would with the Seestar. While it's focusing, the auto button will turn green, but once it's finished, it will go back to white. But once we have the focus dialed in to the best of our ability and the exposure settings are good, let's take a couple of images to test by tapping on the large white button here. I like to take several so I can choose the ones with the best seeing/focus, just like with the Seestar. The images will be stored under your album, and they will be stored as JPEGs, so they will be compressed image files similar to the Seestar's photo mode. Okay, next let's try out time-lapse mode. With time-lapse, we will be creating a time-lapse video similar to what we did with the Seestar. So with the time-lapse imaging mode, you can enable solar tracking under the function button here. And then once the sun is being tracked, under the feature section here, you can select your settings by tapping on the clock icon, and it will show you buttons to control the interval or the time between each shot that you want. And then you'll also have the option to change the shooting duration. So basically, how long do you want to be imaging for? A really cool feature about the DWARF II's time-lapse mode is that it will actually calculate the final film or final video duration for you as you move the values for interval and shooting duration, so you know how long your final video will be. The final video will be a compressed video file that you can access. Now, for a smoother video where the sun doesn't appear to move as much, you'll want to use a shorter interval value just as a hot tip if that does matter to you, but you can always try to stabilize the video in third-party software on your desktop later on. Next, you can adjust your exposure settings and you can adjust the tone settings, and then just make sure you focus everything up with the focus button here. Again, auto focus is an option, or you can manually focus as well, and then you can start the time lapse and you can see how much time has elapsed in the red box here at the top, and then the box to the right indicates how long the time-lapse video is currently. You may want to refocus every once in a while during an interval if you have time, and then the time-lapse can also be stopped the same way we started it by tapping on the big red button here. The video will be accessible via the album and can also be downloaded to your computer. Next, we have burst imaging mode. This basically allows you to take multiple photos very quickly, simultaneously, which is nice for attempting to beat the atmosphere and taking multiple photos and, kind of sifting through them to see which ones are best. Same as before, make sure the sun is being tracked, and you can do that by selecting the function button, and then under feature, track sun as before, and you should be good to go. And then under count here, this allows you to select how many images you want to have taken during a single burst. The minimum is 3 and the maximum is 999. Depending on how hot it is outside and how many images you want, select which is best for you. You also have the same options for exposure and tone settings, and then also be sure to focus. Now you can start your burst session with the white button here, and on the bottom here in the middle, it will show you the number of burst images we want, which is 124. And then next to that, we have a dynamic number for current images that have been taken so far. And then the burst mode will just keep going until it reaches the set number of 124. And then the images will be stored to the album. Next, we are going to take a video. Very similar concept as all of the other imaging modes. The pros of taking a video, of course, is that it will take multiple frames very quickly, which can help with getting good shots of the sun where the atmosphere was more stable and the focus was good. However, for video mode with the DWARF II, the videos can only be taken and stored as a compressed video format, which is totally fine, especially if you just wanted to watch the video on your smart device or share it with others via text message, or if you don't really want to work with the data later on in third-party software on a computer. Not that you can't with a compressed video file, but it's less ideal than working with raw file types since the data has already been compressed and you can't adjust white balance or dynamic range values as much, just to kind of name a few reasons. Not having the option to take and store a raw video is a notable difference between the DWARF II and the Seestar, since we can take both compressed and raw videos at the same time with the Seestar. So moving right along, again, make sure we are tracking the sun and it's all centered up by going to function and then feature, track sun. Now let's adjust our exposure and tone settings, and then of course focus. You can either manually focus or you can apply autofocus or do both. And then once focus is good, you can start the video capture by pressing the big red button here on the right, and then you'll see how long the video has elapsed for with the red box here. And then to end the video, tap on the red button again, and then the video will be stored to your album. Now, for sunspots with the DWARF, I recommend using the built-in solar imaging stacking feature under the astro mode. Traditionally, this imaging mode is used for celestial objects at night, but what's cool about astro mode for the sun is that we can use raw images and take them, and then in the app, it's going to register or align the good frames and stack them together to create a final image that has more detail than a single image would because it has more signal or light. But basically, the DWARF II's astro mode stacking feature for raw images is similar to the Seestar's raw video stacking feature, but again, this is for raw images, not raw videos. All right, before we begin with astro mode, we need to start out either in photo, video, or any of the other imaging modes to get the solar tracking going, since astro mode doesn't have this ability under its function button, and the DWARF II can't go to the sun during the day like it can with celestial objects at night, since stars are visible at night, so it can use those to plate solve and do alignments too. So let's start off in photo mode. We have the telephoto live view going, and then once the sun is centered up, let's begin tracking the sun as normal. And once it has started to track the sun, as indicated here, let's switch over to astro mode in the app. And switching between the different imaging modes shouldn't affect the tracking of the sun, by the way. Now, under function and then feature, we have settings here. This will allow us to select the image file format we want, so we can choose between FITS and TIFFs. FITS is a type of raw file format that stores data in a table format and is popular in the field of astronomy. Again, both raw file formats, which gives us more range to process the data later. Next, we have count. And count refers to how many images we want to have taken. The max number is 999, so I'm going to select 200 for this demo. Next, we have the type of preview to display on screen in the live view mode while the session is going. This is where electronically assisted astronomy really shines for this device, since we can actually see a single image appear on screen right after it's taken, or we can view the stacked image file in real time as more and more images are being aligned and stacked together to reveal more details. I'll select the stacked image so we can see the image stacking process in real time. And then for binning, keep it at 4K, which just means we are keeping the default telephoto resolution. And then before you start your astro imaging session, be sure to adjust the exposure settings to your liking. A note about the white balance though, and other tone settings, all of those will be overridden to the default values for the purpose of stacking, so I wouldn't bother adjusting any of those tone settings for astro mode, just do exposure settings like gain and shutter speed. So let's focus by selecting the focus icon here, select auto for autofocus, or again, manually focus with the plus/minus buttons. And so now with everything dialed in, we can begin the session by tapping on the red button, and on the home screen view, we can see how many images have been taken and how many have been stacked into the final image view we see here. As time goes on, as it tends to do, we will see more details and features of the solar surface appear. Let's move into solar transits. So if you're just joining us now regarding solar transits, I highly recommend checking out the solar transit portion that we covered for the Seestar in this video. But basically, we were able to capture ISS solar transits, and we can follow and apply the same principles with the DWARF II, all the way from planning to preparing and to day of best practices. So let's talk about how we can capture solar transits of other targets. Capturing solar transits of airplanes and birds won't be as straightforward as it was with the ISS and the CSS or the Hubble Space Telescope, since we aren't going to be using transitfinder.com. So obviously, unless we created a mechanical bird that we can control via remote, we will need to rely on some good fortune and good planning. I recommend scouting a location where birds are abundant at a particular time of year. Regions near the coast and breeding grounds tend to have lots of birds, of course. So what you could do is find a potential location via research or in-person observations. You could identify what types of birds are usually there, and you could also learn a bit more about their behaviors and when they tend to be most active to try and plan your shot around that, along with ensuring you have good seeing conditions and good weather. So at the imaging location, which would be near the area where the birds tend to be, but not too close, you can set up your DWARF II or Seestar, level everything, get everything connected to your smart device, and then you could use the wide angle lens of the DWARF II to get the birds in frame and observe them, and then put the solar filters on, and then get the sun in the wide angle view, and then switch to telephoto view and adjust your focus and exposure settings to your liking. Then I would say try a 1-second interval time lapse, or try recording a video and just let it run for a while. But be sure you have plenty of available storage, of course, and your batteries are charged. Again, there's not a definitive science to this, just enjoy your time out in nature with what remains of our dinosaur friends, aka birds. Now, for capturing airplane solar transits, there's still never a 100% guarantee that you'll get the shot, but you can increase your odds by doing a bit of due diligence and practice. So this section, again, will not be as technical as the ISS solar transit section, but will be, I guess, a little bit more technical than the bird transit section. But if you become more aware of flight patterns at your imaging location day after day, and you have a familiarity of where planes are relative to the sun and its altitude, you can kind of start to get an idea of when a plane may transit the sun for your next shot. You can also use apps and websites like Flight Radar 24 to monitor live air traffic for the location you will likely be imaging at. Then you'll be able to see in real time airplanes that are headed in the direction of the sun near your imaging location. If you know the sun's altitude and are aware of the angle you're shooting the sun from, and have a good idea that a plane may transit, set everything up if weather and seeing conditions are good, ensure your solar filters are on, and just dial in your focus and use your exposure settings that you would use for sunspots, and start a video or a 1-second time-lapse video and just let it run for a bit, since planes are fairly large, so that's why I'm comfortable with 1-second time-lapse videos. If you're not, then just use a video. Then you could just review your videos and see if you got a plane transiting. And then you could use third-party apps to just get that single frame, or multiple frames if you were able to get it during a video. So now, let's move into the video's next section with astrophotographer and YouTuber Nico Carver from Nebula Photos. All right, so what are your feelings about how new technologies, not only smart telescopes, are changing the landscape of astrophotography? Does it kind of take the fun out of learning something that is technical, which can be fulfilling and an educational journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think it really depends on the person, but I think that you're framing the question correctly by asking about like, does it take the fun out of it? But maybe it actually adds the fun for some people. Because I talked to a lot of people where it's like all of those technical hurdles are actually not fun based on their personality. For my personality, those technical hurdles are like what makes astrophotography fun in a lot of ways. Because it's like, I guess if you're sort of like a challenge oriented person where it's like, okay, I have this technical challenge, I'm going to figure it out. I figured it out. That's really rewarding. But for other people, I think maybe the fun part is just like a connection to space, and they don't care about the technology part of astrophotography as much. They maybe are just more interested in like, I can get under the stars and within 5 minutes see a picture that this device took of something so far away, and that's really cool. Um, so, but I think then, what I worry about with smart telescopes is how long does that excitement last? Because I think part of what has like allowed me to, be really excited about astrophotography for a long time is equipment upgrades. Even though sometimes I think like people upgrade their equipment too fast and too much, it is fun when you get like a new telescope and you try to integrate it and you can do different kinds of pictures. And the smart telescope, it's sort of like you buy it once, and I understand like the firmware can be upgraded, it can get new capabilities, but it's not really the same as like changing out a camera or changing out a telescope. And so I think the upgrade path maybe sort of like limits the lifespan of the fun with a smart telescope. But I see sort of a future where there could be both paths, because like if you think about where music went, it's like I can just listen to music on my smartphone with my earbuds, but there's a lot of people out there that like still are buying hi-fi systems with physical media and speakers, and they get really into it as a hobby. So I think astrophotography could sort of be the same way. There could be like a more easy to get into path, which would be the smart telescopes, and sort of the bespoke path with all of the cables and all the stuff you have to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, even just like the camera phone, right? I mean, and just the tremendous advances in the overall landscape of photography, digital photography. You know, did it open up a vast avenue for a lot of people to try out photography where they otherwise probably wouldn't have? Definitely. You know, we've seen other photographers, like landscape photographers, still live on, even though the iPhone is out, for example. So, but definitely totally understand and carry the
Yeah,
same
and
thoughts.
that's a really good example, because and it also, that's a cool example because it makes me think of like they make predictions like, oh, the smartphone has totally killed the point and shoot camera. But then I'm hearing about how the point and shoot camera is back and everyone wants these like Fuji point and shoots. So it's interesting how things go in waves, and you can't really predict like the smartphone. I mean, the smart telescope is just going to kill all these other things. I don't think it really ever works like that.
Yeah, very thoughtful. Thank you. All right, so at the time of this video, you've published an incredible series of really helpful videos to help photographers prepare for the upcoming total solar eclipse. But you also have a couple videos about capturing the analemma, which is, of course, a different type of solar photography that I did not include in this video. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how your progress on your project is going?
Sure. Okay, so what the pattern is of the analemma, it's this, and it's been known about, I guess, since like ancient Greek times, because I think that's where the word comes from, is like ancient Greek analemma. But if you are in the same spot throughout the year, just like looking in the same direction, usually you're looking south, at the same time every day, the sun makes this very unique pattern through the sky, right? So if you observe the sun's location every day, you'll see that of course it's in a different spot every day, right? At noon. Like we know that it's going to be lower in the winter and higher in the summer. Everyone can see that. But then if you actually are observing the path that it makes this really cool lopsided figure eight pattern. And the science reason behind that is because Earth's orbit around the sun isn't a perfect circle. It's actually like an oval. And then also our axis is tilted. And so when you take those two facts together, like we're at a 23-degree tilt and we're going around the sun in an oval rather than a circle, it creates this really unique pattern in this way. And so that, I don't know if that was a good way to describe it, but that's the analemma. If you see a picture of it, it'll hopefully make more sense. The key thing is if you look at the sun, the same time, same location every day for a year, and you make this you'll see the pattern that emerges. Now, for whatever reason, I always wanted to do this and have attempted it now 3 times. I've started 3 times and failed each time. So it's one of those projects where I know someday I'm going to finish, but I haven't finished yet. And the most recent time I was sort of doing that thing where it's like, okay, if you make your intention public, maybe you're more successful. So I started making a video series about doing it, but I still didn't keep up with it. But I know what I have to do now. I need to automate it, because if I just rely on myself, like actually going out there and taking a picture at the same time on every clear day, it's not going to happen, because I just am not, it's not how my mind works, and I'm traveling and just things come up. So I need to find some way to automate the camera so that it's just taking a picture at the same time every day. And then I'll just throw out all the cloudy ones, keep all the clear ones, and hopefully it'll work. An easier way to take a year-long picture of the sun that I also want to try is they make this like soda can that's like a pinhole camera, and then it has a piece of film inside it, and it's not the analemma, but you can still see sort of the path of the sun in a different way over a year. So I want to try that too, because I've seen really cool pictures from that project. I can't remember what it's called now, but it's a really neat another neat way to capture the sun over the period of a year.
Well, thank you for that beautiful
Sure.
explanation. Okay, so one of my favorite topics is about just solar activity in general, how it affects the Earth, the things around, like surrounding Earth, us humans. So I wanted to talk about kind of another type of solar imaging, a little bit more of an indirect type, which is capturing the aurora borealis or the aurora australis, of course, commonly known as the northern and southern lights. I know that you had the opportunity to visit one of my favorite countries, Iceland. Were you able to successfully image the aurora borealis? And do you think smart telescopes would be capable of doing such a thing?
Good question. I've never really thought about smart telescopes in the context of aurora borealis. I it's sort of like the same answer, but it'll be interesting if we actually get like a smart telescope eventually that is for wide angle astrophotography, because I'm assuming that's coming at some point. And it would, I guess we sort of have it. There's like something called like the Arsenal device, I believe, where it's like it's an attachment you do for your DSLR, and it allows for all kinds of like crazy shots, I guess. That it's like a hardware attachment that lets you do different time-lapse things and different like composites with an app or something. So I feel like that might be like the bridge to when we get like the smart Milky Way aurora type camera. But again, yeah, the only limitation I think for using a smart telescope for the aurora would be that usually people want the wide shots of it. And to back up, yes, I did successfully capture it from Iceland, and it was how I got into astrophotography, really, because before that, I hadn't taken any pictures of the night sky. But I wanted to see the aurora. I was already into like cameras and filmmaking, so I thought, okay, I'm gonna take pictures of it. And then just that experience of doing that just like really activated something in me, and I was like, oh, I really like this, like taking pictures at night in quiet dark places. And so I started doing Milky Way photography, and then eventually deep sky astrophotography, because what I found was like, okay, this is something I can do on trips, find some grand location, take a Milky Way shot or take an aurora shot, but I wanted to be doing it all the time. So deep sky is really great for that, because you can basically do it from anywhere. Even if you're in a light polluted place, you can get a special, emission nebula filter and do it from a light polluted place. So that's sort of what aurora is, what hooked me, and then I went down the path from there. But I think that, yeah, I think that the big issue with the smart telescopes would be the field of view. Now, but then I remembered, like, the dwarf does have that wide angle lens, so it would be interesting to try that. Like you mentioned, it's connected to like the sun and solar cycles, so it's like the when the sun is at maximum, like it is now, it's like really good time for the aurora. So then you might have a better chance with something like a drone or a GoPro or a cell phone. But during like the solar minimum, you can still go and capture the aurora, but it's not going to be nearly as bright. So then you'd probably want like the wider, faster DSLR lens or something like that.
Well, okay. So my last question for you. The name of your channel, Nebula Photos, kind of inherently implies nighttime photography, which definitely is, your primary subject. But do you ever see yourself kind of venturing more into solar photography just in general?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's some people that like are really good at everything. I don't think I'm one of those people. Um, so far, I haven't been like bitten by that bug, I guess I should say. I don't know. But then an interesting thing is like eclipse imaging. A lot of people think that that is just like solar imaging, but to me, they're like they have all these differences. It's like, because when you think of solar imagers, it's like they're using the dedicated solar telescope, often imaging an HA with like these like little video cameras like from Player One and ZWO. And that's totally the wrong approach for like a total solar eclipse. It's like, so it's just completely opposite equipment. And so I think that's interesting too, is like preparing for the total solar eclipse is again like a different hobby than regular solar imaging.
Yeah, I've never done solar photography outside of smart telescopes. And granted, yeah, I could just, get a white light solar filter, put it on a DSLR and be good to go. But I had just actually just never ventured into that. So up until having a smart telescope, like I was like, oh, like I never tried it. And then I tried it and I was like, dude, this is like really awesome. Same with like lunar photography. And that's kind of one of the things again, like why I like about these smart telescopes is you kind of get to try different things a little bit more accessibly. Um,
Yeah, that's a really cool point too, is like it's sort of going back to your first question of like, does the smart telescope take the fun out of it? But I think even for an experienced person like who does a lot of nebula shooting like you or me, then the smart telescope could be like, this could be a lot of fun to do something different with, to do solar imaging or lunar imaging or something you've never tried, because it's sort of this jack of all trades kind of little thing. Yeah, that's a cool insight.
Thank you for answering all of my questions. Those were beautiful answers.
Sure, my pleasure to be on. I love your channel, and I'm looking forward to meeting up in Texas.
Likewise, yeah, absolutely love your channel and just, it's great just to have you on the shows or the channel and looking forward to Texas. It'll be
Great.
fun.
All right. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Nico.